Hello, Australia. I'm Carol Ann Ford, and this is the Sirens of Audio.
Leave the television show. It's the audio I want. Take it to my playlist.
Yes, mistress.
G'day audiophiles, this is the Sirens of Audio, the show that explores the universe of Doctor Who and other cult TV in the audio medium. My name's Dwayne.
And my name's Philip. G'day, Dwayne. G'day, audiophiles.
G'day Philip, how's things with you?
Things are great with me, thank you. And with you?
Yeah, real good. I heard that there's some exciting developments in Doctor Who the television series this week that affect one of our events coming up later in the year.
Well, you wouldn't believe it, but Caroline Ford just happened to turn up on the TV show. What a shock surprise that was.
That's a very nice surprise. So if anyone wants to grab tickets to that, she'll be appearing in Australia in Sydney and Melbourne in October, and you can get your tickets from sirensofaudio.com. But joining us today is someone I've been wanting to have on the podcast for a while, because we're going to get a little bit of a different type of a podcast today, something a little more unusual. That is not to say our guest is unusual, but let's introduce him. It's Aron Challenger from Aron's Collectibles in Melbourne. G'day, Aron.
G'day, guys. Do you hear that sound? That's the sound of you scraping the bottom of the barrel with the guest list.
Oh, that's so not true.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Very
it's a
good.
real pleasure.
No, it's a pleasure to have you. I've only met you in the last little while, haven't got to know you only in the last 12 months or so because of our events and the signings that have been happening at your store. We'll talk about your store and a lot of the beautiful collectibles that you have. But I'm interested in your Doctor Who fandom. You collect more than just Doctor Who, and that's more than Doctor Who's in your store. But is Doctor Who where you started with your science fiction fandom?
It absolutely is. And if you know me, and I guess you don't know me too well, but a lot of weird coincidences happen around Doctor Who and fandom for me. And I have collected Doctor Who since the day I was born, unexpectedly. That is. One of the things that parents do when they have kids is keep the newspapers and things on the day that they were born. And I'm English. I emigrated when I was 6 months old. And when I was in my teens, my dad was going through the garage and he found all the papers, and the Radio Times was the John Pertwee "Who's Your Friend" cover from 1973. So I can truly say that I collected from the very first day I was born.
Wow.
So collecting's in your blood.
Absolutely. I've always been, I hope not a hoarder, I've always been a collector, and I was always a strange kid where when my parents would buy me a toy, I would open it and I would keep the box in really good condition. I know all my Matchbox cars, I didn't wreck them. I got the boxes and just sat them on top of them and displayed them. And this is a 4 or 5-year-old, so quite unusual.
Did you have your
That's
Doctor Who
unusual.
moment where you knew you were a fan? What was that moment for you?
With the moment where my mind snapped and I said, yes, I'm going to be a Doctor Who fan my whole life. Yes. Back in 1983, Peter Davison visited Australia. And I think he was here for the Logies, and he did a signing at Myer and Grace Brothers. So Myer in Melbourne, Grace Brothers in Sydney. And I would not have known this was happening, but my mum found an ad in the newspaper, and it said Peter Davison was coming to a Myer store for a signing, and she said, "Look, Doctor Who is coming." I was already a fan, but not like obsessed fan, collecting everything kind of them by that point. And she said, if you're really good, we'll go. And when you're a kid, I felt like I was really, really good for maybe months. It was probably only 2 weeks, but when you're a kid, time sort of travels differently. And I eventually said to my mum, when is this Doctor Who thing happening that we're going to go and see? And she said, oh, that was on a Tuesday. We weren't going to take you out of school for that. And that was the point where my mind snapped, and I think they caused an obsession. From that point, everything was Doctor Who, and I was going to collect all Doctor Who and try and amass the biggest Doctor Who collection. So I was already collecting the Target books and Doctor Who magazines and things like that. But that would be the point where I remember myself going, okay, this is going to go into overdrive.
Tell us a bit about this image.
So, being one of those sort of stranger Doctor Who fans, I would ask my dad to take photos of me with my collection. So, I'm about 8 there with my collection of Target books laid out on the bed in that first image in the top left corner. And then down below, I'm about 14 and I'm cosplaying. Before there was a word cosplay, just dressing up as the 7th Doctor with my brother on my 14th birthday. And then next to that is me in a different regeneration. On my 40th birthday, we recreated the picture with my son. And then one of my biggest embarrassments ever has to be the newspaper article that was in the papers here when I was about 16, because it managed to go out without anyone I know at school finding out about it until we were in form assembly a couple of days later. And my teacher at the end of form assembly goes, oh, and we've got someone famous in the class. Now, I was not a popular person. I was the withdrawn kid into Doctor Who. So everyone sort of pipes up as well, what's this all about? And then she said, look, Aron's in the newspaper because he's such a massive Doctor Who collector. So, yeah, that was some great social credibility for me right there.
I noticed in the article, it says there under the photograph that your fluke items, one of them was a Doctor Who record, which sells for about £75 that you bought for $1. Which one was that?
That was actually the Australian pressing of the original theme song. And back before the internet, any international pressings were quite hard to find. And I used to buy stuff from an English dealer that a lot of collectors would remember called John Fitton. And he had 2 catalogues that would come out. One was the new merchandise, which was all the current stuff. And then he would also release a collectible catalogue of all the 60s and 70s stuff. And in that was all the sort of impossible to find in Australia stuff. And one year he had the Australian single for £75.
Do you remember the very first collectible that you ever bought? Was it a Target book or something else?
When I decided I was going to collect Doctor Who, I got 3 Target books. It was Daleks, Zabi, and Day of the Daleks. I got 3 at the same time, and they were the first 3 Target books that I got. And that was, apart from some stuff that I'd accumulated without knowing I'd got it, that was the first of the stepping into the world of collectibles.
So ultimately, it led into getting a store. So tell us how that happened.
So these pictures are of my bedroom when I was in my teens, and you can see it wasn't just Doctor Who.
You're already mapping it out as a store.
Yeah, but it does look like a store, but that was my bedroom. And boy, was it fun bringing girls home to see their reaction. I joke, I never brought girls home because I was a Doctor Who fan. But at the time, I modelled my Doctor Who display on Patrick Troughton from The Omen. I don't know if you guys have seen The Omen, the classic horror movie, and he was a priest.
I have.
And he blocked every inch of his wall out with the Bible that he stuck to the wall, so there was nothing showing. And I decided that's what I was going to do. I was going to block the world out by not a single inch of wallpaper. Even the ceiling is covered in posters, actually. So that's how I went about displaying stuff. But I got into, I guess, collecting, into dealing and becoming a shop very gradually. I was an obsessed fan, and I wanted to obviously buy more than I could actually afford. This is later. This is this is as an adult, sadly. You can see there's new series in there, and the top of that you can see it is stacked to the roof. So this isn't a shop. This is one of the spare rooms at my house. So you can see again that sort of plaster every inch way of displaying stuff never ended for me. And below that, there's a cabinet was at my parents' house because my wife would not let me have more than one room. So my parents graciously let me slowly take over their house. So a lot was at their place. And of course, whenever I'd change it around in the bottom corner there, my son would get into the cabinet and not get out because he had this obsession with getting into cabinets and stuff. So I've just included that as a funny photo. But when I was growing up, this is going to shock people how much I was given pocket money. I was given $5 a month pocket money. And the $5 a
Wow.
month would cover Doctor Who magazine and the Target book for that year. And what I would do is I would supplement my collecting by going around op shops, Sunday markets, trash and treasure, book exchanges, all the things that collectors used to do before the internet came along and sort of changed the way that people collect. And I would find, old Target books. It was a revelation that there were first editions with different covers and things like that. And occasionally you'd find something weird and wonderful because back then there was no internet to show you what was out there. And everything, was a surprise if you found anything that was an old book that you didn't know about or things like that. And I used to go into a shop in Melbourne called Moviola. Now, Moviola was more of a high-end collectible shop. And I knew the guys in there pretty well because I was like the little kid that went in and bugged them all the time. So as a dealer now, I know me when I come in, and I try to encourage them and sort of be nice to them and sort of guide them on the way to increasing their own collections. But I would go in after I went to Minotaur Books, which is another Melbourne sci-fi shop, and they had a 1960s Marx Dalek in there. And it was a tricky action one, and it was $450. And when you're on $5 pocket money a month, $450 might as well have been $1 million because there was no way you could ever afford it. But because I went in there once a month, I pretty much knew all the other toys that were in there in the cabinet with the Dalek. And there was a Robbie the Robot in his Space Patrol Jeep from Forbidden Planet. And while I was going around secondhand op shopping, looking for Doctor Who stuff, I saw this toy in an op shop for $10. And I said to my mum, we have got to buy this. I know this is 2 months pocket money. We have got to buy this. This is in Moviola for $2,500. And so my mum had no idea, but she trusted me and she bought it. And we took it into Moviola, and it was the toy that was in there for $2,500. And they said, you understand, we don't buy it for $2,500. And I said, I don't want to sell it to you. I want to swap it for the Dalek. And they were like, oh, we're happy to do that. So I swapped the Robbie the Robot for the Tricky Action Dalek. And from then on, when I was going to op shops or book exchanges, I wasn't just looking for Doctor Who anymore. I was looking for anything that I could buy to sell at markets or take into the city to some of the more collectible shops to fund my Doctor Who collecting, to my detriment, I have to say, because this way of making money seemed quite easy to me and really undermined my sort of enthusiasm for any academic achievements. My parents were pretty good. They said, as long as you finish high school, we really don't care. They really wanted me to go on to uni and do other things and probably not become a secondhand dealer. But I know in year 11 and year 12, I was wagging school, and I was buying what was in Australia called or in Victoria, an all-day travel card. So it was like a zone 1, 2, 3 card, and I would pick a railway line, and I'd go to the end of the line, and then I would come in to the city and stop at every station, and I'd go to all the book exchanges and all the op shops and things like that. And when I got to the city in the afternoon, there was a secondhand book place called Book Affair. There was Moviola, and there was a couple of other collectible shops that would buy stuff. And some days I was making $600 from wagging school when I was on $5 a month pocket money. And I would walk into
Wow.
Minotaur Books and I would blow it all. And my parents had no idea where all this Doctor Who and all this merchandise was coming from, other than I was finding it at book exchanges and going around. And I do remember being pulled in by a year coordinator kind of saying, "You are taking so much time off of school that you're going to fail the year." I didn't fail. I just got through because I was aiming for just passing, because that's what my parents had said they hoped. And I do remember, it's really terrible to say now, but I was getting this lecture on my future. And in my head, I was just going, no, 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 I already make more than you. No, 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 sort of thing. So that's how my collecting started. And I was very lucky. I'm into music a lot as well. Not a lot of people know that. I have a big music collection too. And when I used to go around the markets down in Victoria, there's a place called Camberwell Market, which is one of the better secondhand markets, and it still is pretty good compared to a lot of the stuff now. And because I was there from such a young age and so dedicated, and going around at 6 in the morning, one of the dealers down there, a record dealer, said, "Look, if you're here in the morning, do you want to set up my store while I look around for records, and then at the end of the day come back and close it up?" And that worked for me because it motivated me to go to the market. And then in between, I worked in a sausage van. So I went and set up a record store, worked in a sausage van, and then closed down the record store and got there so early I could look for Doctor Who and anything else for myself as well. But the person who employed me on the record stall, when I was doing university, well, I was actually studying. I did an associate diploma of art and design, and I was going to get a dip ed and become an art teacher, which my parents would have really loved. He opened up a record shop and asked me if I wanted to go and manage it. So, of course, I instantly quit uni and started managing antiquarian records in Camberwell, and I was the manager there for about 10 years. And that gave me a good grounding on how to run a business, how to deal with people, secondhand dealer laws, all of that kind of thing. So I've been very lucky in my vocation that I've never had to look for work, and I've been asked to work for different people all through my life, up into the point where I've opened Aron's Collectibles. So the pictures there, the very first one in the top left hand corner would be the very start of Aron's Collectibles, which was the top of my cupboard when I was a teenager, and that was all my doubles. I don't know if you can see, but there's multiple versions of hardbacks, which are impossibly hard to find now, that used to be in Target in Australia, and different versions of annuals and books. Mainly in Australia, you could only find books and paper goods. There's a couple of other bits and pieces, but I used to take that to Doctor Who club meetings, mainly the Christmas meeting, but maybe a couple of the AGMs or something like that through the year. So that's where I was starting to fund myself and have my own little business. And yes, I explained as I went to Antiquarian Records and another collectible shop, and eventually ended up with Aron's Collectibles. And there's some pictures of Aron's Collectibles. There's a queue for one of the events. I think that was the Janet Fielding and Sylvester McCoy Day, which was a massive success. And then there's the window. We no longer have the Dalek on the window because someone drove a car through the window at some point. It wasn't a hit and run sort of smash and grab. It was a learner who hit the accelerator too fast, but they took out the Dalek and the Doctor Who sign. They were doing a U-turn. And someone came around the corner and they panicked, so just slammed on the accelerator to beat the car and just went straight into the shop. Luckily, none of the toys were damaged. And then there's just a kind of general layout. We've got a lot of glass cabinets full of all different types of goodies, not just Doctor Who.
How long have you been
Every
there
time
for,
I go
Aron?
there, I watch Philip, and he's like a kid in a candy store. I love watching Philip shop in there.
So we've been here for about 5 years now, and we do get a lot of collectors. I've got on the door, always buying, selling, and chatting. I have a very, very good philosophy on it's being part of a community, having a collectible store. So it isn't just buying and selling. We try and run events. We try to do things that help the community, as in I guess like garage sales and things like that, and put people in touch with other people if they've got collectibles that we aren't interested in, or we might find a better home for them that aren't us. I work with fan clubs a lot and try to promote fan clubs. And if anyone's listening and they come in and they're from any fan club in Australia, as soon as you say that, I'll give you a 10% discount in the store. And generally, we just like to have a laugh and a chat all the time. And sometimes I don't get any work done because the entire day is chatting about Doctor Who, Star Wars, Marvel movies, DC, anything really. So, what a terrible life! What a terrible job I have. And this at the moment is some of the Doctor Who displays that are in in the cabinets in the shop. The one on the left is one of our older merchandise displays. A lot of the stuff in there isn't there anymore. That was an older photo. It turns over very fast. And then this is uh, another photo from today on the right. Those two photos are just a loose Doctor Who classic collection that came in last week that has just gone into the cabinet. So we have a huge turnover of Doctor Who stuff. That's probably because of me, because I'm a big Doctor Who fan and I champion the series all the time. But Doctor Who is the biggest seller in the shop, followed probably by Transformers and then Star Wars. And we have different staff members who love different things, are an expert on different things. But all the staff members have slowly become experts on Doctor Who because so much Doctor Who stuff happens in the shop.
That's my favourite cabinet, that
So,
one.
so more Transformers than Star Wars. That's surprising.
We could talk about Star Wars for a whole podcast, sort of with the way fandom has split on that. But what that has done really is a lot of the new fandom has gone away from collecting in the Disney product, and Star Wars is mainly supported by the three original movies and a little bit the prequels that sort of a generation have grown up with and loved as well. And it's one of those things with collectibles, they go through peaks and troughs. Marvel was on a huge peak and it's kind of gone down into a trough as well. I think everyone sees that who are just Marvel movie fans. There's quality ones and there's other ones that, aren't as loved by everyone. So it is interesting. I've been in the collectible business for so long just to see, how different franchises become popular and go through waves and have a generation of kids that love them, and then something else comes along and they're forgotten. And I've been around long enough to see the generation of kids that sort of grew up with episode one and the original Star Wars prequels now come back to it as adults, where for me that's still new Star Wars because that came out when I was grown up.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So it is interesting. And the Doctor Who stuff is crazy where, people come in and say, oh, I had those gold Daleks when I was a kid. And I'm like, what do you mean when you were a kid? Those gold Daleks are still brand new. It's only the classic series stuff that's really old. But it is lovely to see not just Doctor Who, but a few franchises have stretched over multiple generations, and some of the stuff that was new and interesting and no one knew how it would go has lasted and has had like a lifetime of support and given joy to different people, not just Doctor Who but a lot of different franchises.
I think that leads us very nicely into the next section, because I like to take any guests that we possibly can get onto the podcast into a certain place. Philip, do you know where that place is?
It's down a dark place, Dwayne.
Down a very, very dark place. It's down the rabbit hole. Let's go. The question, I want to put this to Philip first and give you some time to think about it, because I'm curious to know both your points of view. Philip, why do we collect? Why do we collect things? We love this show, but what is it about the things that we love to collect? Why do we do it?
Well, I'd be curious to ask Aaron this question in terms of is the majority of collectors male? Because I do think it's something to do with the male brain. I think whether we're all slightly on the spectrum, which leads us to collect more. I think, yeah, I don't know what we collect, but it's certainly an obsession. And for me, it's completism. It's part of my problem is the fact that I need to complete everything when I start. So I've got to be very careful when I start a collection up because it's very hard for me not to then work to make it sure it's complete in every possible way. Um, I don't know. I just always have. As I say, I've started with with my first collection would have been Doctor Who Target novels. I used to get $2 pocket money a week, so I was a bit off than Aaron was. And every week I'd go to this local bookshop store and buy a $2.90 and then $1.95. And I think Warriors Gate came out, I think that was $2.50. Blew my budget. Um, and so I just started collecting the Target novels. But it was just because I was reading them and reading them over and over again. And so I just had to collect all the novels. And then the Doctor Who magazine came out. So I got every issue of Doctor Who magazine until a particular Doctor started. I stopped getting the magazine in the physical form. And then the hardbacks came out because there's hardly any hardbacks at all when I was a kid. And then different bits came out like the Celebration, and so suddenly I'm collecting all those books as well. So I think just something grabs you and then you start. But I don't know what do you think it is, or what do Aaron think it is? Why do we collect?
It's interesting what you say about there's not a lot of girls or women that collect. There's a couple, but you're absolutely right. It's like 95% men would be our breakdown, I would say. But think about this: when you were in school, who was the most obsessed about collecting stuff? Usually bands and things like that. It was the girls. And it is this really weird thing, I think, where girls mature, they stop collecting, all the Bros albums or Wham or Michael Jackson and things like that as they sort of move on to a new phase in life. Where men go the other way, where they aren't so obsessed with collecting in school and at school age, but more and more of them start collecting as they get older. And you know, all the things you've said about collecting are absolutely true, but maybe from a more psychological thing, I don't know if men need to keep hold of their childhood more. And it is this weird thing about 20 years after something has been on, men sort of get a yearning to go back and collect that. It's like the 20-year rule. There's a lot of toys that I would never collect and never think would ever be collectible, sort of the generations after I grew up. So things like turtles are going to be collectible, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and things like Transformers. But then there's little pockets of toys that you wouldn't think anyone would remember, like biker mice and street sharks and things like that, where sure enough, 20 years after that sort of merchandise came out, a wave of nostalgia grips people and they start asking for that. And I have just learned, do you know what? It's okay to collect anything. I can never guess what's going to be the next big thing or the next collectible because it just surprises me. I do think people collect at different levels. When you're talking about collecting Target books, there's some people who will be happy to get a complete set, and that's a collector. And there's some people that are happy to get a complete set if they've got all the different covers. So they might have 2 or 3 different versions of each book because they want all the different cover variants, and that's a collector. And then there's some people who want every single edition of every book. So when it comes to the Daleks, they might have 13 or 14 identical books almost because they just want every single edition. And they come into our shop and we have quite a lot of Target books, and they will go to the title page of each one and check the edition. So there's different levels of collecting within the collector universe, and I sort of deal with everyone, and it's okay to be at any of those levels, I think.
Did you find did COVID increase it? 'Cause I'm sort of thinking certainly during COVID, I finished off my paperback collection because I thought I had them all, and I worked out during COVID I didn't, and so I've now got every cover variant, blue spines. So I collected everything paperback wise, not every edition, but every cover variant I've got. So hundreds of those, and then I started the hardback collecting as well during that time. I've got about 3/4 of them. I've actually gone. Actually, this is stupid. It's costing me a fortune, and the last quarter is going to be almost impossible. So I've actually decided I'm going to sell my hardback collection. But so COVID for me, and it was probably COVID when I started recollecting all my figures again as well. And I decided I wanted the targets. These are all signed prints by all the artists. So I certainly went a bit crazy during COVID. Did you find that there was a bit more craziness happening with COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. Because people were, well, those of us that were in lockdown, I guess, but a lot of us were in lockdown. There isn't a lot to do, and there's only so much Netflix you want to watch during the day, and maybe some people had a wage that was more disposable income than usual because they weren't going out. Other people didn't because they lost their jobs. But we definitely noticed some of the things that peaked during COVID was the collecting of classic Star Wars, the collecting of Pokemon cards. That just went nuts during COVID. I guess that's sort of something where it's a game as well. And then also the collecting of classic Doctor Who went through the roof during COVID. It peaked the prices. Interestingly, the Star Wars stuff's dropped back down. The Doctor Who and the Pokemon stuff, the prices never seem to drop again after those sort of extra collectors that were collecting during COVID stopped collecting. And people, the other thing, it's increased the price and artificially put the price of a lot of things up. I've seen with Star Wars, if you are not really a lifetime collector, but you were sort of a hobbyist that collected more during COVID, and more people were collecting it at the time, instead of paying $100 for something, you might have paid $150. But now you don't want to collect anymore because you've got your life back and you're out and about, but you don't want to sell that item for $100, what it's come back down to. So there are a lot of COVID collections where they sort of perpetually are on eBay or marketplace, which are just overpriced because they're overpriced for the time now, not what they were originally border. And that happened with comic books as well. A big one was actually comic books. We don't do comic books as much, but the collecting of comic books went through the roof. And a lot of people who seriously collected through COVID have lost a lot of money because the market inflated so much, and it has come down maybe 20%. And if you're buying $1,000 comics, losing $200 on comics is a lot of money.
So what sells better, the classic or the new series in terms of Doctor Who stuff?
Did you want to have a guess?
I would guess the classic, but I might be wrong.
The classic 10-1, easily.
10-1.
So, yeah, it used to be. Look, we're going to, I think, talk about it a little bit, but it used to be more even. But at the moment, it's all classic and hardly any new. When I say new stuff, I mean if character release, Shooty and Millie, and then they release the John Pertwee figure. The John Pertwee figure, like they're both new toys, but the classic stuff sells a lot more.
Right, wow. And that Shooty figure that came out was sensational in terms of looking like him. I've never seen a figure look so accurate before.
Well, I think character, look, it might not be their fault, or it's the way things are distributed. This is, I mean, going back to Star Wars, the same thing. When Episode 1 came out, I sold more Episode 1 merchandise in the 3 or 4 weeks before the movie was released into when the movie came out, because you were selling on people's anticipation of what was coming. And in their head, it was going to be the most amazing thing ever. It was so hyped. And the same thing happened with Shooty, where, love it or hate it, the Chris Chibnall era did not go down well with most people. There are some people who absolutely love it. A lot of people don't. And when they announced Russell T Davies was coming back and David Tennant was coming back and there was a new Doctor and it was Ncuti Gatwa, I haven't seen fandom united like that in such a long time, of all looking forward to it. It's going to be a new era. We're getting David Tennant coming back. We're getting Russell T Davies, who's a pair of safe hands, and we're getting a new Doctor. And it's all going to be amazing because it's the 60th, and then there's going to be a series, and then Disney Plus with it. And there was such an anticipation. I do think waiting as long as they did to release a Ncuti figure was a huge mistake. I think by the time that the figure was released, all that momentum was gone. If they could have got it out in, even 4 weeks before the series was released and just used images from publicity because they were around then, I think they would have sold 10 times as much as they did when the actual figures did come out.
Was that a character choice or a BBC choice, do you think?
I think it was a BBC choice because I'm not 100% sure, but Russell T Davies is has a real tight collar on everything, not just the show, but on all the merchandising, the offshoots, the magazine, the comics, and all of that. He really is a showrunner that really, likes to have a holistic approach to how he runs the show. So I would say it must have been his choice. I mean, they got the Jodie Whittaker figure and the new David Tennant figure out just a couple of weeks after the special. So it's possible for them to be able to do that. And that sold out almost instantly. And the same numbers came out of the Ncuti Gatwa figure. And I haven't checked lately, but I think they're still available. So from something that, came out and sold out instantly to something where the same amount of numbers are produced and it doesn't sell out at all, can't be seen as a success.
And do you know how the selling in the shops went? Because there was both figures were released again for the shops. How's that selling gone?
Well, the thing is, when the classic series figures are released, they usually have a couple of Dalek waves, maybe if you're lucky, a couple of other waves, and then there's new series figures as well. And through everything, I always order, 10 of every classic series Dalek set on pre-order, and it sells out on pre-order, and then I offer order another 10 for the shop, and that will generally be enough to sell out another 8, and two will hang around. So it's not huge numbers. I'm selling, 30 maybe of the popular classic series stuff. The new series stuff I'll put up for pre-order, and we get 1 or 2 people pre-order it, and they say they're only buying it because they're completists. And I got, I think, 2 of the last Jodie Whittaker set, which had the angel in, and I think I sold 1 of them. And I've had a couple of people ask if I will open the set, what I've got left, and split it up, which I won't because it's a new series. It's a new item, which means I really don't make much out of it. We only put the new series stuff in because I support the Doctor Who line, not because, you make millions out of it anymore. So the classic series, far and away, for someone who has worked in the industry for, 35, 40 years now, totally outstrips and outsells the new series.
So while we're still down the rabbit hole, I would just like to say that I find myself with a little bit of FOMO because I don't collect as much as you two guys, and I've often wondered why. Maybe it comes down to
marriage,
budget.
being happier.
Because yeah, possibly that too. I mean, I look at your collection when I'm there at your place, Philip, and I'm just dazzled by how great it is, and I would love to have that on my shelf too. But at the same time, I do also like having my wife in the next room, so that's nice. Yeah, so I plus it comes down to budget as well. I don't have unlimited income either, so you've got to, so sometimes think about what you want to collect. So, you can see the Blu-rays behind me. I decided to start the Blu-rays right from the beginning. I did the same with the DVDs when they came out as well. Lots of Big Finish until the postage price became absorbent. Too crazy to justify getting the CDs out, but I still have a lot of those too. And if the prices for Big Finish were like on par with what they were, just going up just slightly instead of tripling in some cases, I would probably still be getting the CDs as well. So that's I was kind of going more for the experience because I look just on my shelf. There's something like that. That is my piece of nostalgia from my childhood, which I love having sitting on the shelf just to remind me. So that's my kind of merchandise, that stuff that made me go wow when I was a kid. So it all comes down to nostalgia. It's a very, very bad disease, but it's a fun one.
It's nostalgia versus cost. The interesting thing with Big Finish, I would say the majority of the audience they're selling to are sort of guys our age, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, sort of thing. And we are the type of people that don't want to buy downloadable media. Would rather pay more to get a physical CD, and you have that CD forever. And unfortunately, the way things are with price, as sort of physical media disappears, not as many people will jump over to downloads as I think they think will, because there's this thing where people from our generation do not see the value in buying a download.
I do see the value if it is comparable with the CD release. So if the download is £2 less than a CD, then I just don't see as much value in that. Which is what you get with Big Finish. They have the CD and download very close in price to the download on its own, which makes it even less attractive to an old.
Yeah, but I think it's 90% of people now download. It's only 10% of physical, so it's almost transitioned. I mean, I resisted transitioning to download for a long, long time, and then just gave up. And now it's fine. Everything's on my app. I'm happy to just pull out the app, and it's very easy to have, and the pictures come up.
We listen in the car on headphones on our phones anyway. So the way we listen, we don't pull I've got all those CDs up there, but if I want to listen to one of them, I'll download it on the app and listen to it there before I take the CD out and put it into a CD. But I don't even have a CD player set up. I've only got the Blu-ray player out there in the lounge room now. So yeah, that's just how things are these days.
Well, I started with Big Finish when they originally started releasing them, and the first couple I got was still on cassette tape. Yeah, I think I subscribed for 2 years and sadly thought the money wasn't worth it. And even back then, it was because of the postage to Australia, and I was a lot younger then, so you have to choose more wisely on where you collect. And I always thought Doctor Who was more of a visual media than an audio one. And if every single one had been amazing, I would have probably continued, but I found most of them I wasn't enjoying as much. As it wasn't that I didn't like them, it just wasn't worth the money to keep collecting them and subscribing for them.
Well, on that note, let's crawl up out of the rabbit hole and talk a little bit more about Big Finish, because that is, in fact, what the purpose of this podcast is the audio medium. Philip and I love that very much. But let's just talk about this image first, because this is some of your early memories of Doctor Who. We'll get into Big Finish very shortly and other audio, but tell us about your early memories.
So my early memories of Doctor Who are probably different from other people, because I'm pretty sure the first thing I can remember of Doctor Who was the Peter Cushing Dalek movie, probably when I was about 3 or 4 years old, and it absolutely terrifying me. And I know it was the first movie because I vividly remember the scene where they're in the cell and they use their food to blind the Dalek. And what terrified me was the Chief Dalek, the Red Dalek, because we had a lamp with a red lampshade on it, and it was behind a sort of frosted glass window. And to a 3 or 4 year old kid at night, when that light was on behind a window, was it the light or was it the Chief Dalek waiting there for me to go to the bathroom and things like that? So you have that wonderful fear that only kids have that is so nostalgic now, but that's my earliest memory of Doctor Who. Yeah, and the other memories are weird because I actually remember them in black and white, which might mean it was because I was watching them on a black and white TV, or it might be because they're so old that they're just in black and white. Now, I only remember fragments, but the earliest I remember the TV series is Power of Kroll. I don't think that was repeated on the ABC, so it must have been the original screening. When they did all the repeats in the 80s, they didn't do the Key to Time. They always stopped at Invasion of Time, and it wasn't till, a lot later they repeated the Power of Kroll series. And probably the first visual images I have of television Doctor Who in shaky black and white were the Kroll tentacle grabbing someone in the refinery and dragging them in. And it's such an old memory until I saw the series when it was repeated on the ABC in the late 80s or early 90s. I was like, oh, wow, that's what I remember. I remember Power of Kroll. And then the same thing happened with Davros, where I don't remember Destiny of the Daleks at all. But I do remember Davros coming back to life and being covered in cobwebs. And of course, I could identify that as Destiny of the Daleks and was able to pinpoint that. So I thought that was my earliest memory of Doctor Who being terrorized by Davros until I saw Power of Kroll, and that was it. And neither of them are particularly horrific or scary moments, but I guess when you're so young, and maybe if you're just watching something on the ABC in the afternoon after you've watched some cartoons, that is absolutely terrifying. My parents were great. They didn't care about ratings. They let us watch whatever we wanted, and we could go and watch Doctor Who. It was on 5:30 during dinner because we used to watch it during dinner, and they showed Green Death, and my mum was like, maggots, okay, we don't watch Doctor Who while we're eating anymore. So we got to go into the spare room and watch Doctor Who. So as a kid, there's a lot of series that are quite scary that I identified later when the internet came around. I don't know if you remember The Changes, which was about 70s Britain sort of degenerating to no technology, and also Sky, which was about a boy from space whose eyes would turn bright blue, and is very, very sort of that Doctor Who kind of British show, which was a bit more intense for kids than they'd get away with now.
When it comes to audio, did you have any exposure to those Doctor Who audios back in the day? Because I saw Genesis. Well, I heard Genesis of the Daleks, the LP version, long before I saw it on television, and so that's always been an overriding memory of mine. And I know that there's been there was one other release, The Chase. So I don't know if have you ever come across that 7-inch in your collectible travels? Is there many of those in Australia?
There's 3 different versions. There's the English original, and then there's the Australian edition. It was pressed in Australia, and the really hard one to get, it was also pressed in New Zealand. So for completists, there's 3 different versions of, it's just called The Daleks, but it's episode 6 of The Chase on TV Century 21 albums.
With David Graham doing narration, is that right?
It is, yeah. So, and a really, really weird version of the Doctor Who theme, or not even the Doctor Who theme because of rights issues kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, so fast forward years later, and you've got a collectible store, and you're picking up. Now, I think you're coming across. Is it Deceased Estates that you're coming across, and people are letting their Big Finish collections go and other audio memorabilia?
Yep. Going back, I did devour all the audios growing up. I loved Genesis of the Daleks. I don't know if you ever listened to any of the other Tom Baker stuff he did on audio, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We had an old record of that, and a couple of others which are fantastic and almost, fit so well into the Doctor Who universe. I remember being very, very disappointed with Slipback, sort of what we got instead of the cancelled season 23 or 22. And there was a couple of other, audio oddities. I don't know if you ever had the tape version of State of Decay, which was another one they brought out.
I do.
So, yeah. So the last time I had the pleasure of catching up with Phil was actually in Sydney, and that was because, being an obsessive collector, found this collection of Big Finish on Facebook Marketplace. And it was one of those things where I got it for a very, very good price because the guy would not split it up, and it was pick up only, which probably means, anyone, unless you're like me, within, 100K is not going to go and work it all out and stuff like that. But I was already heading up, driving up to Queensland, so I managed to get this. And this was about 1,000 discs, which is amazing. And I thought, wow, I've got the entire Big Finish collection in one go. And then I found out it was from a deceased estate, and he stopped collecting 10 years ago. So there was a whole lot more than this, than there actually was. But you can see there was 9 boxes of Big Finish, and they have been incredibly popular in the shop. The Big Finish, when we get them through, probably does outsell videos, DVDs, and Blu-rays just because they're so hard to get on the secondary market in Australia.
Right. Wow.
Right. So had he collected everything up until that point?
Yeah.
Or was there a few ranges that were missing? What do you think?
No, he seemed to have everything up into that point, and it was all in order, and people were like freaking out about it. We had whole runs of stuff, and I got it at a good price, so we put it out at a good price, and I think we've sold about 80% of it in 2 weeks, kind of thing.
Oh,
So that
wow.
gives you an idea of how popular Big Finish is if you can get them for a reasonable price. So this is going back to what Dwayne said about the price of postage. Bringing it into Australia is really a killer for the local market.
So what were you selling them for roughly? What's a CD worth?
Single disc ones $9, double disc ones $19.
Oh, that's a good price you're selling them for then.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people were very, very happy.
Yeah, they would be.
So
I should have known. I would have added to my collection.
there were, because it was something I had bought and people knew I'd got it. There were people waiting at the shop the day that I got back to go through it. So it was quite a feeding frenzy of Big Finish. And it was lucky that
Wow.
some people, like most people, were collecting different eras of stuff. And we actually had a fan who was in Victoria. She was down from Sydney. And I said to her, we just got these down from Sydney, and they had the original Galaxy book stickers on the back where they had been purchased from. And I think we were cheaper than Galaxy when they originally came out 20 years ago. So I think,
that's cheaper than I was buying them for.
Sorry?
That's cheaper than I was buying them for.
Yeah. So, the other thing with the shop, like I said, I like to help out the community. And if we can get something cheaper, I will put it out for cheaper so everybody's happy. And everybody was happy with this collection.
Just out of curiosity, did you have the McGann gold logo or the updated blue logo in that collection?
Would it disappoint you to say I don't know? So,
you don't know.
I know
the gold one is the misprint that was highly. Well, it's not a misprint, but the BBC didn't like it, so they asked them to change it.
I think it actually probably was there because one of the guys that bought a lot of them said he had all the McGann stuff, but he was buying it again because it had a different logo on. So
yeah,
I'd
if he
say
bought directly from them, it would have been the blue logo, but the original releases were gold. So, yeah.
Well, the thing is, I don't know about what the distribution is for Big Finish here. I know that Minotaur would get them in and they were more expensive than ordering them direct, but it was still expensive to order them direct. So Galaxy and any of the retailers that got them must have got them through a distributor, I would have thought. I know that the Doctor Who Club of Victoria used to stock them for, maybe 10 years ago, would get like 4 or 5 of each one, and they were using them to distribute them locally. But you really just don't see them around.
Those early missing episodes, cassettes, do you remember the ones that were narrated by Colin Baker and John Pertwee? There was one, Tomb of the Cyberman was about to be released when it was found, so it was held back.
Yeah.
Is that a hard one to get, or is there still plenty of those floating around?
It's one of those interesting things. If you are looking for them, they tend to be hard to find, but they're probably a lot easier to find than people realize because we will get collections from the 80s and they'll have all those tapes in, and we just put them out, for maybe $10. So they go for a lot more on eBay. I think the whole eBay thing is also, it's not a false market, but it's a very different market to going out and finding stuff locally. I know, for example, someone was telling me, I just paid $100 for these books, and we had them in our shop for $6 each, because they actually do turn up quite commonly in collections, and we find books hang around if we don't put a cheaper price on them. So I have had people come in and go, I'm going to buy this to put on eBay. You can do it yourself. I'm like, no, we've made our markup and I'm happy for you to do that. I think the collecting game is being one where you're patient enough to find stuff at a reasonable price. If you need to find Tomb of the Cybermen on tape and you get online, there probably will be one where you can buy it now for $50 or $100. But if you're happy to just find it one day when you go into a collectible shop, you might get it for $10 or $20. It's the same with all collectibles, though. Online, people are trying to make the biggest profit they can. That's why eBay is an auction place, because they want to auction it and get it to go for more. And what tends to happen on eBay, you might get two people who are after something, and it artificially inflates the price of one item, and you can search that and you can see it, and people are like, this is going for this. No, it's because at Christmas, maybe someone who doesn't know what something's worth looks on eBay to get a present for someone, and they know that's what they want, so they just get it, and it goes for a silly price. Where if you come into shops or go to fan club meetings that are selling stuff or collectible fairs, you will often find it for a lot less.
All right, back to Big Finish. And one interesting thing is you said that Big Finish, they weren't all for you, but there was one Big Finish that stands out to you. Tell us about that.
It's probably not one that anyone picks as their favourite, and it's one of the more recent ones, I guess. It's the fanfare for the common men, and it kind of talks to me on a lot of different levels. Now, I don't know how you listen to the Big Finish tapes, but I've changed the way I listen to them. It used to all be about the story and is it any good, and maybe judging it a bit too hard. Now I listen to them from a nostalgia point of view, where maybe the story's not great, but it takes me back to, when Colin Baker and Nicola Bryant were doing the missing episodes. And some of them weren't great stories. And you can understand, why that series maybe didn't go ahead. But you know what? It was absolutely amazing hearing 80s Colin Baker and 80s Nicola Bryant doing a story that you haven't heard before. So in that case, maybe the nostalgia for how it sounded and how it made me feel got some of the more, dodgy stories across the line. I always loved the Peter Davison era. That was the era when I sort of became a fan. And it's a short era in the history of the show, but when you're that age, years go for years, and like 3 years of Doctor Who seemed like 10 years of Doctor Who for me. There was there was Tom Baker regenerated into Peter Davison. That was the first time I had been alive during sort of a living regeneration, because I was so young, all the regenerations had happened before, kind of thing. And you had the Five Doctors, which was the biggest event that had ever happened for Doctor Who. It was almost like Doctor Who was a serious show. It had gone for 20 years, and the BBC had done an anniversary special, and it was on the news about Longleat, and the ABC had put money into the Five Doctors. We used to have to wait a year or two to see episodes. The Five Doctors was on a month after it was on the BBC, which was absolutely unheard of at the time. It triggered our family buying a video recorder, because I had to record the Five Doctors. And, being a spoilt kid, I guess, we actually got that. I guess my parents were already considering getting one. But so that era for me was a fantastic era. And I absolutely love the TARDIS crew that was Nyssa and Tegan and Adric. So as a kid, they were the best. As an adult, you can see through, there's some shortcomings. But as a kid, they were the ones I grew up with. So anything that's good enough to give me the nostalgia and feeling of being a kid again and watching that era is fantastic. So I like a lot of the episodes where Peter Davison is teamed up with Sarah Sutton, just because it wasn't something that they really allowed to happen in the show that much. Janet Fielding and Tegan are fantastic, but she often dominated the scenes. And that still happens when you watch the DVD extras and Blu-ray extras and anything where they're all together. And it's a nice relationship. It feels like they really do get on and they act like they're a family, because families do that. But having the Doctor and Nyssa together for the run they did on Big Finish is fantastic, because it gives Nyssa a much bigger voice and more to do than she ever had on the show. But what pushes it over the line for me is the nostalgia I have for music and the 60s and the Beatles and things like that. And this is one of those things where you look at the concept and go, well, how can they do a Beatles episode without being able to use the Beatles? And I think they absolutely nailed it. And sometimes where you hear parody music that's meant to be set from an era, it falls flat. A good example for that, and I'm not picking on it, is always a twist at the end for the latest series or the last series of Doctor Who, where it was okay, but if they'd bought the rights for Twist and Shout and did their own version of that, I would have thought it was much better. But when they did The Common Men, which of course has that link right back to the original 60s Doctor Who with Susan and her listening to them on her headphones, the songs are actually good. They actually sound like a group that could have stepped into the void the Beatles would have left if they weren't around. So one of the things about when they do a musical of any of your favorite shows, be it Star Trek or Buffy, it lives or dies for how good and how catchy the music is. And this wasn't the Beatles, but it was good enough that it had the nostalgia for the era and it wasn't embarrassing. And I thought that was great. And then they used that rule where you can get like 3 chords of a song before you have to pay any copyright. And having them actually have the Beatles coming out and the Doctor showing this of the Beatles and them starting playing and the Beatles music fading into the scream of the end titles, it actually gave me goosebumps. So that's why this probably very underappreciated story is my favourite Big Finish story.
Coming soon from Big Finish Productions. Doctor Who, 1963. Fanfare for the common men.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome the year's top pop sensation.
This is what I was talking about, Nissa.
Why is everyone making so much noise, Doctor? We can't even see them yet.
This is what the Beatles inspired in people. Good grief.
What is it, Doctor?
It's not them.
Who are these Beatles then? Are they another group?
Yes.
Are they any good?
You must have heard of them.
Well, nobody's as good as the Common Men.
The Common Men!
You haven't landed us in the wrong place, have you, Doctor?
No, 31st of October 1963. This is definitely right. Something is very, very badly.
Get down!
Cheers, we've been the Common Men and will continue to be so tomorrow.
Subscribers get more at bigfinish.com.
Well, I can tell you that it's very appreciated by us, and we actually had the writer Eddie Robson on the podcast a little while back talking about it when we did a feature on all 3 stories from that trilogy. It was a trilogy that was sort of leading up to the 50th anniversary. So with the 5th, 6th, and 7th Doctors. So Eddie Robson did a great story here, and he always writes a good story that I love. He's one of the good ones. He hasn't written anything for Big Finish for a while, but it'd be good to get something from him again soon, I think. What do you think, Philip?
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think the thing it really does show is how you can do a Beatles show without the Beatles. So, I often say, to me, the best Doctor Who is actually now usually found on Big Finish more than on the new series. Because the new series, they recast the Beatles. They didn't look like them. They didn't sound like them particularly. They didn't use them to save the plot at the end of the day. Whereas this is a story where the Beatles have been taken and missing. So the Beatles are ever present in this story, but they're not in it. And it just showed how clever you can be in terms of clever writing and problem solving. Which the thing I admire about Big Finish is they do a lot of very clever problem solving to deal with small casts or limited budgets, and what they get away with is just brilliant.
Yeah, I think again, one of the things that disappointed me with the new series, it was not a disappointment, in Lux they actually used Rollover Beethoven, and it wasn't the Beatles, but they obviously got the rights for it. So they could have used a song that was covered by the Beatles when they had it. I guess the thing with the music being stolen meant they didn't really have to go down that track, but it would have been really good at the end. The Beatles covered Twist and Shout. The Beatles covered some really good rock and roll songs. I know they want Murray Gold to do the music, but I do wish I think if they had done a Beatles song and the Doctor had done a cover of it, or they'd done a cover of it, it would have probably been more of a sting in the tail of that episode than what we actually got.
Yeah, and they do play other songs and other hits. I think there's Toxic again. They use Bucks Fizz, and the one because Bucks Fizz won that for England last in the Eurovision. They used Bucks Fizz last night or this week in the episode.
Yes.
So they do get other performers to do stuff.
So yeah, the Bucks Fizz one is making your mind up, but the other Bucks Fizz song is Land of Make Believe, and I do wonder if that'll come into it next week.
We'll see.
Who knows?
Yes.
All right, let's change direction slightly. Thanks for your recollections on that Big Finish story. It's a great one. So I'm glad you brought that one up. And let's just talk, because you've appeared a few times on the 42 to Doomsday podcast, talking about collectibles and things like that. But you've also spoken about a deceased estate, which had some possibilities for potential return missing episodes. You spoke about that for a while. It's been a while since you've given us an update. So is there anything you can update us with now?
Yep. So for anyone who's listening to this who listens to the audio side of things but doesn't really follow a lot of the other stuff, I'll give you a bit of a background to that. As a secondhand dealer, I get to go and look at deceased estates. And when you go and look at someone's life, anything can be there. Usually I get called for toys. This one was actually a friend who knew I was a Doctor Who fan. And so when I went out there, I was absolutely blown away, not just because of the Doctor Who stuff. It is a very strange thing for people outside of fandom. They often don't understand what is a collectible and what is. So they had called me out because he had a full set of the Eagle Moss Doctor Who figurines, which were the magazine that came out monthly that had a little Doctor Who figure with them. So they knew I was a Doctor Who fan. They saw them. They said, everything is going to hard waste. You can come out and take whatever you want. So first I went into the garage and got all these Doctor Who Eagle Moss figures, but the garage was probably a 3-car garage, and it was stacked to the roof with tubs that these figures were still in the magazines. And so I was going through that, and I said, we can take anything. They're like, yep, it's all going to be thrown. So there was the complete run of the build an R2-D2 and build a 3D printer. And then we found comics, and there was, years and years and years of comics. But we'll cut through all of that and get to the important stuff. When I actually went into the house, the guy had been a massive hoarder, but a compulsive recorder of television. And he had recorded more on video and other formats than I have ever seen in any deceased estate in my whole life. I was pretty obsessed with recording stuff off of television, and at my absolute, zenith, I had 1,000 bought tapes in clams and maybe 2,000 other tapes that were recorded off television, and that was obsessive and got too much, and I stopped doing it, and most of those got thrown out. He had easily 10 to 20 times as much as me, too much to count. And it went right back to the 60s. And it's unusual for people to be able to record stuff off air in the 60s because the ability to do it on a domestic machine just didn't exist. No one could even buy them. They were only in television studios or maybe universities and places and institutes like that. And from what I understood, he had got a video recorder for the same reason I had got a video recorder, because he wanted to record Doctor Who and Star Trek. And we found stuff that stretches right back to the 60s, and the BBC have been involved, and we have sent tapes back to the BBC, and in some of the batches we found stuff that was off air. And the earliest off-air stuff was an episode of Softly Softly, and it was from Series 3, and it had only been shown once in Australia, and that is 1969. So I think someone worked out from the date that was shown, that was the same time as Face of Evil Faceless Ones or Evil of the Daleks was on. So he had the potential proven from something he had recorded off air at the time to have recorded everything from Face of Evil, Evil of the Daleks forward, which of course is a big swag of missing material in there. And also the ABC sometimes repeated stuff. And sometimes that isn't easy to document or find what they did because they would put it on during rained out cricket and things like that. So I have someone I know locally who absolutely swears in the late 60s, early 70s, he saw Macra Terror when the cricket was cancelled. And I think it's been proven that Evil of the Daleks might have been shown when the cricket was cancelled as well. And the tragedy with this whole thing was I got called in 2 weeks too late because the people who were clearing the estate had that non-collector mentality where all of these old tapes no one could watch, no one was interested in anything in them. So basically they threw them all out 2 weeks before I got there. And the only ones that I found were the ones that basically fell out of the top of the boxes as they were taking them to put in the hard waste vehicles. And they actually said, it was a thing where they deliberately targeted those things because they thought no one could even play them anymore, which is nuts because he had all the machines to play them under the house. So I don't know. I have a feeling that was a really good chance to find missing material, and 95% of the stuff that it would have been on was cleared out and destroyed. And I did go back to the people who were contracted to come and clear the estate, and they told me the process of what happened. And I'd love to be able to say we could go to landfill and dig them up, but they were basically put through those huge rollers with teeth on and absolutely destroyed. There's no chance that they said 15 minutes after they got to the hard waste place, they were gone. There was no chance of finding them. But that said, the collection was so vast and it was hidden so randomly all over the house and the greenhouse and under the house and in the roof and in the walls that we did find, a couple of dozen tapes. The ones that have been sent across to the UK have had interesting stuff on, missing material as in adverts from the era. Now found, probably 100 adverts from the era that don't exist anywhere else. Some of them have been put up. You can view them on the 42 to Doomsday YouTube channel. And the whole bureaucracy of the thing is what slowed things down. I could not save the estate because it was so big and I had 3 days to save it that I had to call other people in. And I was in conversation with Chris Perry and Kaleidoscope in the UK, and he advised me what to do, and other various people who people in fandom would know as missing episode experts advised me what to do. But the thing I was up against was time, and time was 3 days to get an entire estate out of a house instead of it going to hard waste. We had the Australian National Archive come down. I rang them and they said, we can't get anyone down for about 2 months. And I said, well, look, this is the deal. And they said, sorry, we can't do anything about it. But when I actually started sending them photos of what was there, they said, can you hold it for 2 days? And that was okay. So they got someone down and they went through it, and they took a couple of things, vinyl records actually, that weren't in the National Archive because this guy collected vinyl as well. But they didn't want to take the whole collection. They wanted to go through and cherry pick stuff. And that wasn't what I wanted because you really needed to save the whole thing. And I was very lucky that I knew at the time one of the deans of Canberra University who was also a Doctor Who fan, and he championed it in the Canberra University for an archiving program. Now, believe it or not, they have an archiving program and it's pornography, because apparently no one's archived pornography before. And that's what the students are looking at. And he thought it would be a much better idea to move it over and start going through a domestic videotape collection and archiving Australian material. And of course, that's a much better, sell for the university, and they went for it. And he said, if they can hold it for 2 weeks, we can collect it. Pretty much you have to get everything out of the house. We won't be able to send anyone into the house, but we will collect it if you can get it out of the house. And Simon, the guy who I was dealing with, had kind of seen over the couple of days how much interest there was in this from all around the world and people coming down from uni. And he agreed to hold the basically destruction of the estate until the uni could come and collect it. And his only sort of comment on destroying all this priceless material was when he saw how excited and how other people were excited, and, you know, having conniptions because they found a videotape from the 60s, was maybe I made a boo-boo destroying all that stuff. So from someone who's not a collector and not interested, he could not even see the value of it. And it's one of those weird things. I've said this before. The guy I was dealing with, Simon, is now passed away himself, was Pluck a Duck from Hey Hey It's Saturday. And there were 3 or 4 different Pluck a Ducks, and he was one of them. And there are missing episodes of Hey Hey It's Saturday, and Daryl Summers has a website, you know, going, if you've got any of this stuff, we want it back, kind of thing. And he was on the show, and he still had no idea that missing material was wanted and searched for and important. And he truly did think, because I spoke to him about it, like, how, why? And he said, I really thought, like, these old tapes, no one can play them anymore. Like, even TV stations don't use these anymore. I really just thought they were useless and no one could do anything with them. And that's why we got rid of them the first. So the sad thing about that is he did say, because if you've been on, you know, the hunt for missing episodes, there's a lot of lies and stories and double truths and things out there. So the first thing you think when someone goes, oh yeah, he recorded all the Doctor Who stuff from the 60s, is like, yeah, you're being wound up. That didn't happen. But he said they recorded for Noel, who was the person who passed away, all of the Doctor Who and all of the Star Trek, and then all of Countdown, which would be another major find if we came across it. And on the VHS, there was all of the Doctor Who and all of the Star Trek and Countdown from that point. And on the older tapes, we found there was a Star Trek. So he wasn't making it up. You couldn't fake, you know, an old episode of Star Trek. And it's one of those things with all the 3 things you were looking for that were, you know, important, you know, in pop culture, Doctor Who, Countdown, and Star Trek, we find the Star Trek, which everything exists. So if you'd found anything else from that era, even if it was an existing episode of Doctor Who, it would have proved, you know, he had been recording it. But the Softly Softly was the one where the BBC, I think, were like, okay, right, we need to be examining this collection. And the reason why I met Phil and got the collection of Big Finish stuff in Sydney a month ago was because the deceased estate is so big, I had to put it in our storage rooms, and I am still finding boxes of tapes and reel-to-reel and pneumatic things and things like that. I have now been through everything, but I had one last carload of stuff to drive up to the uni. And when I went up to the uni, I collected stuff that is more 60s and 70s tapes. There's not a lot, unfortunately, but they have now gone back to the UK for the BBC to put in the best hands to recover them. None of these tapes can be put into a machine and played. It would probably destroy them. They're gummy and they've stuck together, and they need to be baked and different processes that allow them to be viewed. I know the Star Trek tape, they said it got one view out of it and then that was it. So the tapes you see there, there's just a whole selection of different stuff. Unfortunately, the reel-to-reel stuff looks like videotape, but it's just audio. There probably will be missing Australian radio plays and stuff there because he taped a lot of stuff off air. And you can see the picture on the right there with all the tapes sort of stood up. That's one run of Doctor Who. And this guy was obviously an obsessive hoarder and recorder because he recorded run after run. So he had all the episodes and he'd record them again and he'd record them again and he'd record them again. So you'd open a box and you'd find the 90s repeats and then you'd find the 80s repeats, and it just stands to reason because the old tapes had old material on. He was recording the 60s and 70s stuff. So that's a bit sad that was lost. You can see in the pictures there, one shed we opened and it looked like it was all brand new tapes, but every one of them was recorded and just put back in the original packing boxes. He was very, very, I thought when I first found the tapes, they were all brand new because he didn't even rip the plastic off them. He must have got a razor and put a thin line across the edge of the tape to get the tape off, recorded it, and then put it back in. So he would do that, and put them back in the original packing box that they went out to the shop with, and he would put them just away. And I don't think he ever rewatched anything. One of the sad things is people have asked me, is there any evidence that he, updated his collection, so digitalized any of it? And I have found a couple of instances where he did. I have found some 80s countdown episodes on USB sticks where they've been digitalized, and I'm pretty sure they're not the repeats that they show over January here because they don't have the watermark in the corner. So that would suggest to me that they were the original ones, because every station has watermarks on the corner of all their broadcasts now. But for these are the videotapes that the BBC are really interested in. That's the Star Trek one across the bottom now. So he recorded, he updated some stuff, but I'm pretty sure he didn't migrate this stuff to the older stuff to newer formats, just because all the machines were under his house, and the 60s machines and the 70s machines were in the back corner under the house with 80s, 90s, and 2000s stuff put in front of them. And he was quite an unfit person, and I don't think he could have got to those machines to update stuff even if he'd wanted to. The really weird thing was he had a working pneumatic machine, and he was still recording pneumatic stuff off TV up to the 90s, and there was a whole bunch of unused pneumatic tapes as well. So I've got them in the shop, which I've got one of the pneumatic machines in the shop as well. Just as sort of a
What are the handwritten notes I can see over the tapes? There's one in a plastic bag, and
I'll tell you what, the handwritten
notes of what the.
Well, the handwritten notes were frustrating. The guy who recorded this stuff, his name was Noel Williams, and his father was William Williams, and his father was the one that set Noel on this path. Noel would have only been about I think it was about 9 or 10 when he started recording stuff from the 60s. His father has audio tapes that go right back 20 years earlier, and his father actually listed on the stuff what it was, and it was quite easy to identify. Noel has like a cryptic system that I couldn't crack. The Doctor Who stuff had Doctor Who written on, but you'd pull out the inner piece of paper with the details of what was meant to be there, and it would just be like dates and hieroglyphics and pictures. The really weird thing, he didn't write what was on a lot of the tapes, but he would write at 82 minutes, there's a tape jump, possible damaged tape, and things like that. So we're not talking about someone like you or me who would tape something, put a sticker on it, write what was on it, and put it on the shelf. He was obviously, I think, trapped by his own hoarding lifestyle. By the end of his life, he was recording on 3 or 4 different machines at once, digitally and videotape still, and running from room to room to turn stuff off and turn it back on. So he could have potentially had an amazing, collection and a YouTube channel that would have blown everyone away if he wasn't still doing that up until he basically died.
So how many 60s tapes have gone back to the BBC?
Only a couple of dozen was all we could find. The last, I think, if you go to the next picture, so So this picture is at Brisbane University. There was a bit of issue with Canberra University, which is why the whole thing paused for almost a year. It got caught up in bureaucracy with different departments wanting to do different things. Jason Bainbridge, who's the lead on this whole project, said he would go to meetings which ranged from people going, this is the most important cultural find in Australian history for pop culture, to why do we have this junk taking up these rooms? We need to put it in the dump master now. So he eventually moved on, which has been great because he, who was doing a pilot program for this, took the collection as part of his deal for moving up to Queensland. And as soon as that happened, when he was at Canberra, for example, he told me they weren't going to give any more to the BBC. They weren't going to let anyone look at it. It was their collection. They were going to exploit it however they could. Now they're back at the Brisbane Uni. It's back on track where it's open to people to go and study, and they're going to start looking through it again, and the BBC are welcome to help them out. And indeed, they've returned the tapes that they took and given the university digital copies, which is great because they can actually view what was on them, because I don't think they can be viewed again. And Jason is going to be doing an announcement, I think June, July, mid-year, about what's actually happening. Jason is in the middle bottom picture there, and I don't think he would mind me saying that the uni is going to be working across multiple departments, and they're still going to be doing the archiving part of the course that they were going to offer to kids, or not kids, uni students.
Yeah.
The media and television departments there are interested as well, and they're going to spin it where they kind of have their own YouTube channel where they release the most important things they find each week. Could be missing adverts, could be news clips that don't exist, or stuff that's historically important, and things like that. And I think that would be, in Australia anyway, a popular channel. And because they're a academic institute, they can get away with showing so much before copyright comes and bites them, kind of thing. So some of the stuff that was up there, I know, was like Graham Kennedy's Coast to Coast, where there's highlights online, but there's not a lot of stuff. And there was like the full run of Eat Carpet, an SBS show that I tried to look in what existed and what different and what didn't. And SBS even couldn't tell me themselves. So there's going to be some really interesting stuff turn up online from this. And you never know as well, because he was taping everything. There'll be a lot of little bits and pieces of Doctor Who stuff from like the afternoon show, not the stuff that exists like the episodes, but during the run in the 80s, James Valentine would often, champion the show and do competitions and have different bits and pieces. And a lot of that fans recorded at the time, but no one recorded everything. So I'm sure there'll be bits and pieces from that turn up. And you can see there in those pictures, I found a TARDIS on campus, so that's got to be a good omen. And then we were basically laying out the 60s stuff that we could find in front of those windows to see what was audio and what was visual, what was video. And unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of video. If all of the stuff I thought was video, we would have found something amazing, but a lot of it was audio. But there was still enough to take, half a dozen tapes back. So you've got to cross your fingers. But the good thing is everything is being gone through and sorted by people who care about it. And if there is anything there, it will eventually be found.
Well, where was Ian Levine when we needed him? He could have saved everything if he was there.
Where was my friends telling me come and pick up the Doctor Who 2 weeks earlier before they threw it all out? Like, that's one of those what ifs. I guess you can't dwell on it too much.
Yeah, I wonder if there's another. Yeah, how many other hoarders might there be? Just one more hoarder that we may have this stuff and we may be able to get.
Well, the thing about being a secondhand dealer, and especially this was more with music than toys, there were a lot of hoarders out there, and a lot of people have large collections that nobody publicly knows. I think in any group fandom, not just Doctor Who, but Star Wars or Transformers or anything like that. There are collectors who you don't know are out there. And I am very fortunate because I'm not another collector, but a dealer who supplies items to people. I get maybe that extra level of access to different people who are secretive, who other people probably wouldn't, because I'm actually supplying items for their collections. So there are huge collections out there. Like, I'm sure in Australia there would be um, huge film collections that might hold stuff and hopefully find their way back to the BBC. One of the worst, it's not one of the worst stories, but one of the things that happened, and this is going back 25 years, a couple of pallets of film turned up in an auction house called Young's Auctions in Camberwell, which was just around the corner from the shop I used to work at. And I didn't know about it. And they were auctioned off. And years later, one of the customers came in and he was selling his collection. And it was a 78 collection. And they're the old shellac records that were around before vinyl. So they weigh a ton and they just have like one song on. They're the old gramophone ones. And they're 10 inches. And he said he bought one of these pallets because the 10-inch film cans would fit the 78, so he could store them in his garage and they wouldn't get damaged. Now, I think they've shown this on 42 to Doomsday. One of the cans had Macra Terror on the label, and
so he threw it out.
He got it and he took all of the films and he put them straight into the bin. But the crazy thing about the Macra Terror, that was a 12-inch can that he didn't even use, and he still just chucked the thing out because he said it was too heavy to carry them all around with the film in. And so I think on the 42 to Doomsday website there might be a picture of it. And of course, like all of these things, huge debate. Oh, it's real. Oh, it's fake. All I can say is he bought them, didn't try and, sell them or make up a story. I just went through his collection when he sold his 78 collection for us and found that. Maybe if you're a canny auctioneer, you go and put Doctor Who, the Beatles, or whatever is popular on a couple of cans and sell them. But I know Mark and Rob, who looked into it, found the identical kind of film can with handwritten labels on, and it seemed to be the same person writing it as 60s BBC or ABC. So possibly that was out there and disappeared. What he did say, though, there was a couple of pallets that were sold, and he threw his out. What happened to the other pallets? Unfortunately, the auction house is long gone. But I'm pretty certain not everyone bought them to use the film cans as containers for something else. So there's always a chance, and it's always going to be the weirdest story that you don't expect to the ones that yield results. Because if it was the common ones that you kind of chased down and knew about, everyone's done that, So who knows? I'm sure at one point there will be more recoveries, and hopefully there are some in Australia.
And do a lot of collectors just have stuff for them and they don't want to share it? I mean, is that why there could still be Doctor Who missing episodes there, because people actually do know what they have, but they just don't want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where some people get a thrill from having the biggest public collection, but some people get a much better thrill from having a secret collection that no one else can have. And I know it's weird for me. Look, I don't want to publicize what I've got on the internet or anything, but I'm happy for people to know that I've got a big Doctor Who collection. But I do know people who have massive, massive collections that are a secret and no one knows about. I delivered in Queensland again some Star Wars figures to a guy who'd been buying online for me for ages. And I said, he bought some particularly expensive stuff. And I said, look, I'm going up to Queensland. Do you want me to deliver it to you? He's like, oh, normally I don't have anyone over, but, I've known you for years buying stuff, so yeah, you can come over and drop it off. So I was just being nice, and I thought, it's better than something going missing in the mail. It is the biggest collection I've ever seen, Star Wars, in my life. It is like it looked like it was a barn or an aircraft hangar size stuff with all racks in it. And he had stuff going right back to the 80s, and I'm still in the bags that he'd bought it from the toy shop in. And one of the bags I opened and look at has 3 carded Yak Face, which is the most expensive Star Wars figure, just sitting in the original bag that it had come back from the shops in. And this person has no interest in letting anyone know that he's got a massive collection, no interest in selling anything. And he is the type of person that collects everything from, cheap garage sale Tarzo cards or something like that to really, really high-end graded figures. And he just has it, and it is his joy to have this collection and know that he has the biggest collection he knows of and no one else knows about it. I have found toy collectors aren't really like that so much. That's a more unusual one. A lot of people, people know they have collections, they just don't like to publicize it. I did find with music collectors, it is a big deal to have original stuff that no one else has. We bought the ABC's vinyl archive, our shop did, when they went over to digital and got rid of all their albums. And that was a massive, massive archive. And for anyone that collects music, you would know that one of the things that collectors desire are promo copies of stuff or acetates of stuff, which are can only get a couple of plays out of. They're sort of more promo material and things like that. And we found an acetate recording of a Neil Diamond song. So not something that was rare or anything, but the acetate is incredibly rare. And we knew a person who had bought the other one also from our shop that had turned up. So they must have sent some to Australia. And that was the only one known worldwide. And I called him and said, look, we've got another one. You're not interested? And he's like, I absolutely am. I said, I think this one's in better condition than the one you've got. He's like, I'm absolutely interested. And I said to him, well, if you want to bring the other one in, we'll, do a partial trade for the lesser copy. He's like, oh, no, I'm going to destroy the other copy. Whichever one's in worse condition, I will destroy because I want to have the only copy in the world. And I thought he was joking. But when he came in to buy the one we had found, he brought his old copy and he said, yes, the new copy is more is in better condition. He bought it and he said, watch this. And he got his original copy and snapped it in half and threw it on the ground and make a big deal of jumping on it. And he said, I had to do that in front of you because you knew there were 2 copies and I want there to only be 1 copy. So I had to destroy it in front of you so you knew that I wasn't just saying I would destroy it. Now that is the extreme range of, this kind of mania for having, the only existing copy and secret stuff. But there are collectors like that out there, and being a dealer, I do come across them. And it is a sad, sad thing as well. When we got this collection from the ABC, because I'm a Doctor Who fan and I know the importance of missing material and one-off stuff and archive stuff and things like that, there was a lot of really, really unique stuff in this collection that should have gone to the National Archive. And I rang the National Archive and said, look, we've got all of this stuff from the ABC. It should go into the National collection. It should be in a museum where everyone can hear it. And I said, and this is like bad but good, I said, I will donate it. I don't even want any money for it because I want it to go to the National Archive. And whoever I got, they said, oh, we'll look into it. And they got back to us and said, look, we're really getting rid of all the vinyl ourselves, so we don't really want any more vinyl. If you send it up, we'll have a look through it and some of it might go into the National Archive. But they wouldn't even pay for me to send it up to them. They just wanted me to send it up. So you have this this sort of dynamic where you've got collectors that are going to pay thousands of dollars for these discs, and you want them to go into the National Archive, and the National Archive knock you back. So what's going to happen? They're going to go into private collections and no one's ever going to see them. And I like to think I did try what I could to get those items into the National Archive, and I just couldn't do it.
I just find that it's a tragedy that probably a lot of these eccentric collectors maybe have families or don't have families at all who understand the value of these things, and when they leave us, it'll just be the same situation where everyone just starts throwing things out and no one knows the importance of these things.
Well, I think the important thing now, a lot of these collectors are never going to give stuff back. I think the important thing is making sure what happened with this deceased estate doesn't happen to other estates the same size. If you bug people who do garbage disposal, maybe they'll remember if they see film cans, but it does work because I actually called a lot of the local garbage disposals and said, hey, if you find this stuff, I will buy it off you if you bring it in. I contacted about 8 different places, and there's a guy from one place that probably has come in 4 or 5 times with film cans and stuff like that. Nothing's been any good, but I've bought all of them off of him just because I want him to keep bringing stuff in, because who knows, he might bring one in and you say, well, I'll buy that. And he said, well, it's part of a big collection. There's 1,000 of them or something like that. But I think it's really hard to do because it isn't like any program would like to do public awareness on the importance of not throwing out stuff in deceased estates. You get more of these programs that say, clear everything and live with nothing in your house. And, if you haven't looked at something for 5 years, get rid of it. Where that's no good if you've got someone who's recorded something or kept something for 40 or 50 years. I don't know what the solution is to that, where you stop people from instantly throwing stuff out. The other thing I see, being a secondhand dealer and dealing with deceased estates, it's really hard to stop people just destroying stuff, because if you inherit some crazy uncle's house, and it's in a nice area. This was in Camberwell. So it was a $2.5 million property that, someone was inheriting. And someone tells you, oh, those tapes are worth thousands of dollars. You go, and just throw the tapes out, because you don't want to spend your time trying to, sell stuff all over the place to get a couple of $1,000 where you're getting, a jackpot millionaire inheritance.
All right. Well, there's just one final thing I want to go over in a little bit of detail, and that is some vinyls that you sent me that I didn't realize were so prolific in their differences. Let's have a look and see. So tell us what we've got here, first of all.
Okay, so I think when you guys approached me originally to come on the podcast, I said, well, I'm not a big expert on the Big Finish stuff, but I'm a collector of original vinyl, and I'd be happy to talk about that. And so I've sent you this first because this was the original Doctor Who music that I was introduced to it in this order as I was growing up. So you see that TV Favourites. My parents bought that for me on cassette because it had the Rupert the Bear theme. Now, I don't know if you remember, it was a kids show. It was a British one, and I really loved it. So even though I wasn't a Doctor Who fan at the time, I had the Doctor Who theme on that, and it is one of those terrible done by, some session orchestra that would never, ever, be played anywhere. Versions of Doctor Who. But that's, for me, my personal first exposure to having the Doctor Who theme and owning it. And then below that is the first official copy of the theme that I bought, and that was when the HOW version of the theme replaced the original version in the 80s, and that was the advert for it. So that's the poster there. It's sitting behind me in the room, actually. The advert for the Peter Davison and Tom Baker version of the theme when they originally put that out, and I bought the Peter Davison.
I have both
one.
of those.
I remember going into the ABC shop and I could get Tom Baker or Peter Davison, and I remember going, I'm going with Peter Davison, because at the time I was a fan, but not a a massive collector and didn't have to have every version of it. So, and there is a Colin Baker one of that they released later as well. But we're going to have a look at some of the vinyl through the years, mainly the theme. These are the original. When we talked about the article where they said Aron found a 75-pound version of this was the original 60s one. So the Doctor Who theme was one of the very first items of Doctor Who merchandise. We're going to look later. There is an earlier version than this. There's the sheet music is the green piece of paper at the top there, which was the original theme. And I find it interesting that Doctor Who was created by Terry Nation in that sheet music. Now,
I didn't know that.
Well, I don't know that either, but obviously he probably was quite happy to be credited for that. So when people collect records, I was talking about promos and acetates, and I don't know if you can see on the labels there, the top one is an UK promo, and you can tell this because it's got an A printed on the label, and these would be the demonstration records sent out to radio stations. They're called, A promos. And down the bottom is the Australian one, and the Australian versions didn't have the A printed on them. They had that red sticker, which is called a bullet promo. It's like there's a bullet mark going through it, so it's the red sticker. So they would have been the original two versions of the official theme that were released. But the interesting thing
can I just ask?
Yep.
The text that I can see on the bottom right, is that side 2? There's a totally different song that's not related to Doctor Who at all. Is that what that means?
Yeah, it's Brenda and Johnny. I think This Must Be Love. And I reckon they lucked out big time because they were the B-side on that record for 10 years. And every time it was reissued, they would probably got some residuals for a B-side track that was tracked away on a BBC TV theme. So, yes, it just had a random song on the back. The interesting thing in that picture, though, is the bottom left pink version of the sleeve. The Doctor Who theme in the 60s never came with a sleeve. So no picture sleeve. It just came in the plain record company sort of envelopes. That I found in the ABC when I cleared out their archives, and it was kind of a crudely printed version of a cover, and they had made an adaptation of the sheet music, which is above, but they'd taken the Dalek off, and it was printed in pink. And this would have been released in Australia before Doctor Who was even shown. And it had on the back of it, and I wish I had taken a picture of it. I've sold it. I know the person who's got it, but he couldn't find it in time for this podcast. It has written on the back, weird Halloween atmospheric music. So I find that a really interesting piece of history where someone who doesn't know what Doctor Who is, has never seen the show, listens to that and labels it sort of spooky Halloween music, and that's what the BBC would have used it for up until the show came out, and then it would have been used as promo for the show, I guess.
And the sheet music's a piano score?
Yeah, it is. So the sheet music, I think, has pretty much been in print since the 60s. Probably goes out of print, but it comes back every couple of years, and it is just the piano music of the Doctor Who theme.
Oh, okay. I've never seen that. I'd like to get that.
So what have we got here?
So here's a couple of different versions. You could get different versions of the theme because, of course, it's reissued. And if you've got the original version, you can see under sort of the circle on the larger picture, it says copyright 1964. And then on the ones under that, so ones that aren't from the original pressing, it says originally pressed in 1964. So if you want an original release of the theme, you want one that just has 1964. Both of them are pretty hard to find. If you're a completist, you probably want both of them. But they have the original orange Decca sleeves, and one of them has the 64 copyright, and one of them has more text and says originally released in 64. Yes, 64. So here's the Australian versions. So the Doctor Who theme did get released in Australia, and I've probably found, being in Australia, more Australian versions than I've ever found of the UK version. And the Australian version probably would be much harder to find in the UK. Our population is a whole lot less, so they would have sold much less of them. And it comes pretty much in an orange sleeve, but it has the Sydney, Australia address on it. And on the label there, you can see it's got Sydney printed on the label. And there's two versions there. There's a bullet sample, not for sale, which I've highlighted with Sydney Chapels underneath it. And that would have come from either a DJ or a radio station. And then on the top left there's just the standard Australian release, which is the same without the sticker.
I'm curious to know who Paulette is. Just that handwritten name at the top.
So that would have probably been the original owner or who got it. Like, one of the things with records, when you buy a collection, it's a bit different from now where you go online and you just download the music or watch it on YouTube. People used to actually lend records to people and swap them and, go to parties and take them because, when you're a teenager, you can't buy a huge collection of records. And to stop people swiping them, you'd find a lot of collections that have the person's name on. A lot of them are girls. You find a lot of teenage girls back in the 60s or 70s wrote their names on the plain covers so their records didn't get stolen. So probably the hardest version of the 60s theme to get is the New Zealand version. So you've got the orange label there, and you can see at the bottom where I've, enlarged it, you can see it's His Master's Voice New Zealand. It is interesting all over the world. It was released by different record companies. I can't imagine there being more than a handful of this pressed in New Zealand. I've only ever seen 3 copies, I think, turn up. If you know Chris Hill, who runs the Space Museum site, he has one in his collection that has a nice yellow New Zealand sticker on it as well. And that's the only one I've seen that's turned up with that sticker. So if you are collecting all the different versions of the theme, I would say that is the hardest one to find. And then in the blue sleeves, in the smaller pictures on the right, the theme was so popular that every couple of years it would be repressed and reissued. It is one of those perennial favourites. Probably, if your child grew up and he was a Doctor Who fan, beyond the books and stuff, it would be one of the things you might grab them for Christmas. And because the theme was pretty much the same for so many years, it's always going to be sort of popular to that sort of up and coming audience who discover the series.
Some interesting sleeves here.
So I find this really interesting. We get to the 70s and they release a stereo version of the theme for the first time. I have to say the original mono version are probably my favourite versions of the theme. They still sound absolutely awesome. But what they did in the stereo version, which I kind of think ruins it, they put a TARDIS dematerialization and effect, 3/4 of the way through it. And the other disappointing thing with the theme, the original Delia Derbyshire theme ran from Unearthly Child up to, I think, Macra Terror, and then they updated it a bit to put in, I think they call them wind bubbles or air bubbles or something, and that's sort of that almost ascending background music. So the original theme really just has a beat and the and sort of the melody, but when you got to the Patrick Troughton era, when they started putting Patrick Troughton's face in the titles, I think the first story was Macra Terror, they changed the theme and added more background elements into it. I was thinking about it today. I don't think that version of the theme, so that version that went right through to Horns of Nimon, has ever been released on a 45 single. So you could get it on some of the various compilation albums, but that sort of version was never available on 45. This is the first version of the theme as well, where you can see has picture discs. They're pretty similar. One's the drawing of the TARDIS and the other one is the actual opening title sequence. These are actually really hard to get. They were done on very, very thin paper, thinner, I think, than a lot of records from the same time. So they always turn up munted and destroyed. So finding nice copies is quite hard. And I have to say, some of these photos are mine. Some of these are a friend of mine, Edwin Patterson, who helped me out today by sending through a bunch from his collection too. Yeah, so now we get to the 80s. And the 80s is where obviously they got a lot more commercial, and JNT was aiming the theme. I think he said um, to Hal when they did the theme, he wanted it a bit more disco. And so I know some people don't like this, they like the original theme. I remember, and I think, you know, from Leisure Hive, I became a fan and watched everything. I remember being absolutely blown away by the
Yeah, me
new
too.
version. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was one of those things where we had seen repeats of Doctor Who for years and years and years. I, growing up, thought Tom Baker regenerated back into John Pertwee, because in Australia they'd show they'd show all the latest series, and then they'd go back and show a couple of Pertwees. And I
Yeah.
remember seeing the regeneration in Planet of the Spiders to Tom Baker, and they showed a couple of episodes into that, and then it felt like about a year later he regenerated back into John Pertwee, but that was just repeat. So I remember when they actually showed the new opening title sequence and had the new theme for season 18, being absolutely blown away because it was so different from anything else. And I think that in part was why I loved Doctor Who so much and became a fan. At the time, neuromantic music and new wave music was the kind of music that I was gravitating to. And this wasn't too far away from some of the electronic stuff that was appearing in pop music as well. So Doctor Who actually seemed cool for a little bit when this theme was on it. Now it gives me that warm nostalgia of the 80s. It's kind of that thing where pop and synth became a bit dated, and you know, it's like, oh, that all sounds a bit twee. And now it has almost that warm nostalgia for the time you saw it in, and it's become very, very cool again. So this is one of my favorite versions of the theme. And I do say I love when the Big Finish have kind of ramped up some of the different elements in it. It sounds great still, I think, on the Big Finish stuff.
What's this
So,
Eric Winston version?
So, would you believe it? Eric Winston beat the BBC to releasing the Doctor Who theme. This is the very first official piece of Doctor Who merchandise, if you don't count like magazine, Radio Times reviews and articles, and magazine and newspaper things that people collect. This is actually the first produced as merchandise piece of Doctor Who. There's a couple of different versions. The promo advanced copy must be the very first piece of Doctor Who merchandise, just because it would have gone out before the official release. And then there's a couple of different versions of the actual release. If you look underneath the promo, you can see it's the 60s version of the theme. And the label is slightly darker, and it doesn't have the cutout that you can see on the other two. Now, the cutout in the middle, if you remember jukeboxes, you could push that out of the center of record and you could put that record in a jukebox. Why anyone would want to put Eric Winston and his orchestra doing a cover of the Doctor Who theme in a jukebox, I do not know. But they obviously must have thought it was going to be a big hit. And he was one of those sort of artists that would do a lot of covers of popular things at the time to try and cash in on it. So there's a few different versions of that there, including the standard version, the jukebox version, and a couple of different contemporary record sleeves for Pi that released it at the time. So if you are a Doctor Who collector, that's where it all starts.
Wow. I've got the Jeff Love and his orchestra version of the Doctor Who theme.
Well, do you know what's interesting about that? If you can track one down, that is the only version of the Doctor Who theme ever to be released on 8-track. There is a Jeff Love science fiction themes, which mainly is popular for Star Wars and Close Encounters and all of that, that was released on 8-track. That is one of the few items of Doctor Who merchandise I have never owned. Very hard to find.
Okay, I've got that.
Oh, this looks interesting. BBC banned Dalek record.
Yes, it's one of those stories that is kind of legendary. They released the A side, so the two there in the colour sleeve and the one on the bottom left were the A side that went to radio stations to play as a preview. And in that version of the song, there is Morse code, and the Morse code spells out SOS, the Daleks are invading. And apparently it's law in the UK, or it was at the time, you can't put out an emergency broadcast on Morse code like that. So the BBC had to ban the album and stop it being played. And that's the article from the newspaper saying that the record has been banned. And then when they issued it to the public on that black Parlophone record label on the bottom center there, the Morse code had been removed from the track. It didn't matter because people had heard it, so they weren't going to buy it anyway. Like a lot of novelty Doctor Who themes, they're good for one listen once, and you would never ever want to listen to them again because they're pretty crap.
Speaking of crap,
well, I don't know. I think one of these is good, and one of these will make your ears bleed. I don't mind the Fraser Hines song. I think musically it's quite good. The lyrics are a bit on the nose, but I think it's actually produced quite well and almost is in that prog era of the 60s that makes it highly collectible. The fact that it never took off and that it was a pretty average song makes it rare now. The picture sleeve at the top with Fraser Hines on is so rare. That's my copy. When we had Fraser Hines in the shop, he asked me if he would like me to sign it. And I said no, because it is so rare to find one, even putting his signature on it. I didn't want to damage the cover of the record. So,
wow.
So that was only released in Germany. And there's only a handful of those that have turned up. But one of those songs that's so bad, you never want to listen to it again, is Who's Who by Roberta Tovey, who was, of course, Susan in the Dalek movies. And she would have had her arm twisted by someone who said, you're going to be a pop singer star kind of thing, to record the abomination that she did. And it is so bad that it's actually easier to find promo copies than the actual song that anyone has bought. And even that Polydor one on the bottom there, it's a bit hard to see, but it has a promotional copy stamp on it. And this was actually promoted. You can see there's some promotion for it that ran in, I think, TV21 comic at the time. I'm not 100% sure, but it is really scraping the bottom of the barrel musically. The Fraser Hines one, fun to listen to a couple of times. That one, like, you try to block it from your memory.
A few other novelty tracks here.
Yeah, the other one you would probably want to block from your memory is I'm Gonna Spend My Christmas with a Dalek by the Go-Go's. It is purely a novelty track. It's probably worth listening to once to hear a Dalek wishing people Merry Christmas in a Dalek voice. It is obviously one of those things that the BBC would probably never allow to be made now. It is musically feeble. It is that bad. But like a lot of this stuff, if you're interested in Doctor Who, you can find it on YouTube and track it down and never have to listen to it ever again. There's the picture sleeve, which is incredibly hard to find, again, because it was so bad, no one would have bought it. It does turn up just in the record sleeve more, just with the Oriole logo or a sleeve. If you are interested in getting all of these novelty tracks in one go, there was a CD produced with that beautiful 60s Dalek artwork on called Who is the Doctor? And it has all the novelty tracks. And yeah, so how often should you get that out and torture the family in the car?
I think I listened to it once. I'm not sure I've listened to it ever again.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people say about the music from the 60s. It is sad that Doctor Who never seems to have done, a pop track back then that captured like the 60s Beatlemania, Dalek mania kind of vibe. I guess we have the KLF doing Doctor in the TARDIS is the closest we really got to something that charted and did quite well. And that has a whole lot of issues now because of the Gary Glitter connection. So there you go.
Can I just ask, the Go-Go's, single there. Was the B-side to that, was that the Fraser Hines doing Time Traveller? Where was that song found?
No, I think Time Traveller never got released. Wasn't that the one he was going to do, and then the first track he did bombed so badly they never released it? I think he mentioned that he did record it, but they've never been able to find the copy of the original masters.
No, it's out there. I've heard it.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's probably one of those novelty tracks. I kind of like it because of its quirkiness, but yeah.
Yeah. They're all kind of interesting to listen to once and have a bit of a cringe and laugh about, but you wouldn't be putting them on your regular playlist.
Well, that was fascinating, getting some of those facts about the vinyl, Aaron. Thanks for that. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Some facts in there that I've never heard before, so I love it.
And some tracks that you'll never want to hear.
Yeah, probably. All right. To finish up, there was some more that I wanted to talk about merchandise-wise. However, we're probably running a little short on time. So I wanted to see, rather than do a recommendations this week, Philip, in arm's reach, can you pick your favourite piece of merchandise, show us what it is, and tell us why? Anything that's in arm's reach. Not your favourite of all time, but just something that's there that you can grab and talk about.
I don't know. You're asking too much. Seriously, Dwayne, you shouldn't listen to the pre-warning.
Wouldn't have been as much fun then.
No, in terms of what's around me is, I've got all the Science of Audio mugs from all the events that we've done up the top there. TARDISes, Daleks, that's Matt Smith era and other eras. Over there on the piano is 9th Doctor and 10th Doctor. And then in front of me, when I'm watching, so down there I've got all my, what are they called? I forget what they're called. Eagle Moss. I'm sorry, what I'll do then. And then up here I've got, First Doctor, Second Doctor, and all my character options. So this room is just my character option space at the moment. Upstairs will be all my DVDs, my records, my magazines, my books, etc. But asking me about a favorite, I don't think I have a particular favorite. It's a whole collections I'm getting. So, yeah. Sorry, no, can't help, can't do that.
And what was your address again, Philip?
Yeah, no, not telling you. Definitely not telling
what
that.
What about you, Aaron? Have you got something in arm's reach that you can show us and
I have some
wax lyrical about for a minute?
I have some interesting stuff. Sorry.
Pick one.
So my favourite Doctor is Patrick Troughton. Probably not the most common choice, but there isn't a lot of Patrick Troughton merchandise. So if you just stick to Patrick Troughton, it can be a pretty cheap collection. I love this. This is a TV Tornado comic from the 60s, and it's got a fantastic... It is like well spotted. It isn't even Patrick Troughton. And the thing is, TV Tornado did not have the rights for Doctor Who comics. So there's this fantastic cover, and there's a tiny little article with a tiny picture inside, and that's it. But one of my favourite monsters is the Ice Warrior. And so I'm going to show you just something that links up with this comic. So this was a package that nearly got me killed and divorced. So I'm going to show you what looks like a load of old crappy pieces of material, and you can tell me if you can identify it.
That's not a bit of Ice Warrior costume, is it?
No, I'm saving that for last. That's a piece of 70s Silurian.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow.
So,
don't know what that is.
That's some original Axon. There's one end of a tentacle. You can kind of
Wow.
see in there.
That's cool.
So that's 2 original mandrel scales.
Where's
And
the poor
then-
costumes? You destroyed the costumes for these.
Well, unfortunately, no. I'll tell you where they come from, and that is a piece of 60s Ice Warrior
That's
skin.
odd. Ice Warrior.
Now, I have a friend, a lot of people would know him, Mick Hall, who's a big collector in the UK, and he bought a lot of the original costumes when they sold them back in the 80s at Bonhams and stuff like that. And he had an original Mandrill and an original Axon. And when he sold them off because he realized they weren't going to last, they were going brittle and falling to pieces. And after he sold them, he sent me some of the pieces, which turned up and was like my wife going, "What is that?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's Axon and it's Mandrill and it's like Silurian and Ice Warrior kind of thing." And she just thought I was nuts. But I might get the Ice Warrior skin framed up with the original Patrick Troughton comic because I think it would make a nice display. So that's the most interesting thing I can show you that's within arm's reach.
Excellent. Love it.
What are you sharing,
Love
Brian?
stuff like that.
Actually, I'm going to go something else.
I already shared mine. I don't do merchandise, so I've got nothing within arm's reach that I can get apart from my Genesis of the Daleks and Slipback cassette. Very, very boring. Very, very boring.
So just in terms of my big finish.
Oh, that's nice.
So that's the original artwork for The Conspiracy of the Raven by Christopher Naylor. So
That's fantastic.
So it's, and actually in the flesh, you actually see all the pencil mark. You see there's the blue all around Patrick Troughton's, the blue pencil line all the way throughout his suit. It's just, it's a beautiful piece of artwork. And Patrick Troughton is also my favourite to Doctor Who, Aaron. So there you go. So when that came up,
I was thinking that when he said it.
Yeah, I mean, Christopher actually contacted me and said, because I tried to get another piece of his work. Because he was pretty up for the first Doctor, and I do know who bought that in the end because when I said, "Oh, I wanted that," then later I was having a conversation with someone who was the one who bought it. I went, "Oh, you bugger!" I tried to get that, so he knew I wanted it. So when this one came up, he offered it to me first. So it wasn't cheap, but boy, I love it.
No,
my only
piece.
Piece of original artwork, which is actually going to go on the wall back here. I just haven't moved it yet.
All right. So on that note, we'll wrap it up for this episode. It's been great having you on, Aaron, and hearing all those different stories about various things. Absolutely fascinating stuff. But you also have a YouTube channel that you appear on. Is it your channel or is it your mate's channel?
There's a few of us. It's called the Sci-Fi Zone. At the moment, we're doing weekly reviews of the new series of Doctor Who, which is called DNA Reviews, which is Dags and Aron. Dags is one of the guys that works in the shop with me, who I think you've met. He's a very animated guy who doesn't really watch Doctor Who at all, so it's interesting to see his reaction. And we'll usually review any of the new sci-fi stuff, so we've just done Andor as well. But the Sci-Fi Zone, there's a group of different people who put different things on the channel. And I'm sure if you're into science fiction, Doctor Who, Star Wars, or any of the major sort of big movies like that, there'd be something on there to check out.
And where's your shop?
So we are in Blackburn in Victoria. We're number 3, 1 Main Street in Blackburn. And I tell you what, if anyone sees this and comes in and mentions the podcast, I'll give them 25% off their first purchase.
Whoa!
Ooh.
Gosh, okay, that's generous.
Very generous.
No problem. So yeah, just come in.
I'll be mentioning the podcast next time I come down.
for sure, no problem. And of course, as I said, anyone who comes in and mentions fan clubs will always look after, and also anyone that comes from interstate who decides to come and visit the shop, happy to look after you and make sure it's worth your while coming in.
Thanks, Aaron. I can guarantee you're always going to be well looked after.
Looking
Thank
forward
you once
to
again for coming on, and much appreciated, Aaron. So thank you.
No problem. Looking forward to seeing you guys again next time you're in Victoria as well.
October, not before.
Won't be far away. All right, Philip, been great to be in your company too. Thank you.
You too, Dwayne. Have a lovely week.
We'll catch you all next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
This has been the Sirens of Audio, Time and Space Roadshow, taking a look at Doctor Who collectibles with our guest Aron Challenger and your hosts Philip Edney and Dwayne Bunny. Theme music by Joe Kramer. Catch up with all the latest info, including news on our live events at sirensofaudio.com. Got some feedback? Send your email to sirensofaudio@gmail.com or find us on all our social media at Audio Sirens. Thanks for listening, audiophiles. We'll hear you next time.